Hello, and thank you for joining us on At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson. In the 1990s, counties across the state of Illinois had referenda asking voters if they would approve something called PTEL. That is a property tax extension limitation law, or you might know it as tax caps. Some 39 counties now have PTEL in effect, but most of those happened in the 1990s. There hasn't been much in the way of referenda recently, but PTEL still has effect in many, many counties, including Tazewell County and Logan County. And I have representatives from those two counties here to discuss the impact of PTEL on their counties and what the future might hold. To have that conversation, joining us is David Hepler. David is a former chair of the county board in Logan County and is currently the chair of the Finance Committee. Thank you for coming up from Lincoln.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And also joining us is Dave Zimmerman. Dave is a 9-year leader of the Tazewell County Board. He is the chair. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And you're rather unique in this area because the voters elect the county board chair.
That is correct. I run countywide.
Okay. And also with us is the Tazewell County Administrator. Her name is Wendy Farrell. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I think we should start probably with a definition of PTEL. I made reference to it in my opening remarks, but what does PTEL do?
Well, as you mentioned, it's the property tax extension limitation law, colloquially called tax caps. We're not allowed to raise our levy greater than the rate of inflation or 5%, whichever is less. And if you average out the rate of inflation for the last 20 plus years, it's been just over 2%. In the last 5 years, it's just been over like around 1.5%. So it's a way of putting a brake on property tax increases. Now that doesn't take into account new construction, but existing structures or our levy as an aggregate is held in check.
That puts a limit on growth when other expenses are exceeding that 2% growth.
That's correct.
So how do you, I mean, we all know that if my expenses in my household increased at 2% a year, I'd be jumping for joy. It's put some pressure on Tazewell County.
It has.
In what capacity?
Well, we're fortunate to be in Tazewell County because our EAV has grown every year since 1982. And so we've been able to kind of forestall some of the consequences we're seeing now with the new growth and with the growth of the existing properties, the valuation. But now we're getting to the point where with state revenues declining and our costs increasing, you know, between commodities, I mean, the cost of asphalt, the cost of labor contracts, on down the line continue to escalate. And as revenues start to flatten out and lower or decline, we're now in the position we're in now where we're going to get a referendum again in March.
So Wendy, tell me a little bit about the referendum.
So I believe it was in November, the board passed putting a referendum on the March ballot, and we will be asking the voters to approve a 15-cent increase to their property tax bill.
That would raise it from what to what?
So it's about 0.49 now, and that would raise it to 0.64.
That's the county's share of the property tax?
The county share of the property taxes, yes. So for a home, $100,000 home, it would be about a $50 increase that they would see.
Why is it necessary that, well, first of all, let me ask, how, in comparison to the other 101 counties in the state, where is your property tax rate right now?
We are the second from the bottom in the property tax rate.
Do you know where it might be if this referendum is approved?
If this is approved, we would be the 5th lowest in the state.
And in brief, why is this necessary? Because you've had a low tax rate for, you haven't increased it in a couple of decades, I think.
Correct. The reason is, as you stated, costs do not continue to stay low. They increase every year. We are also dealing with, well, we have decided to take more of a proactive rather than a reactive approach to looking at our maintenance and building needs. And so as we've done that, we have identified $5.5 million in repairs that are needed to our buildings. These are what we call needs, they're not wants. things such as rooftop units, windows that are drafty. We have a chiller system at our McKinsey building, and that we need to replace that as well. It's getting past its useful life. We also have election equipment that will have to be replaced this year. So we have looked at those items, and then we have forecasted out based on where revenues are now and our projections into the future, along with looking at expenses, and it's truly maintaining expenses. So we have said if we held commodities and contractual flat, or commodities and yes, commodities contractual somewhat flat. We know personnel costs raise because of union issues or because of union contracts. We know that we are going to be in a situation in which our revenues will be exceeded by our expenditures by quite a bit.
And it's not too different down in Logan County because you have some capital expenses that you've put off, and now you're facing a need, as Wendy would call it.
I would say so. We definitely have some capital cost with our courthouse, which is a beautiful historic building, but it's also used for many of our governmental offices in the courts, and quite possibly with some expansion to the Logan County Jail.
Can you give us a dollar amount on what that might be?
Well, it could vary on the courthouse from maybe as little as $200,000 or $250,000 if we didn't preserve the exterior dome, to as much as $4 million if we do. And there are estimates. We had an estimate from the sheriff recently that it could be $5 to $6 million to either add on to our current jail or to build a secondary building.
Dave, Wendy mentioned, I think she mentioned proactive, if I recall. And you've been reactive in a way in the past?
We're a pretty conservative county, and so we get the maximum life out of everything that we have. I mean, we buy good equipment and we use it to its fullest extent, but by that reactive, like this chiller in the jail, we knew that it was getting towards its end of its life. We want to be proactive and put those things actually in the budget and plan for these replacements so that we don't get in a situation like we were this summer when the chiller was going out, or this air conditioning unit. And we have a jail full of prisoners that we have statutory and federal guidelines on how we have to maintain the temperatures in there. And so we didn't have the time that we needed in order to walk through the process where we could get the maximum value out of those bids.
So that means that you do a sole source
Yes.
purchase?
Yes. So you don't have the planning time to draft bid documents and put it out for bid and solicit to get as many competitive bids as you can. Instead, you are trying to find who can do it the fastest so that they can address the need immediately.
In our discussion so far, I think maybe the viewer would come up with this impression that, so why did we approve PTEL to begin with? It sounds like it's kind of handcuffed the counties. Is PTEL a good thing, David?
And I can only speak for Logan County. I feel in Logan County it's both a good and a necessary thing. I might feel very differently, though, if I was in the county to our immediate west, in Tazewell, northwest. So, but I think that, and I've seen this, every county is different, and the life of a county ebbs and flows. Some counties, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, like DeWitt County to our immediate east, with the Future Energy Jobs Bill, the Clinton Power Station has at least another 10 years and hopefully more of life. And I believe that they may pay more property taxes than every other element within the county combined. So, their situation is very different than maybe ours in Logan, where we're relying more on wind farms, or other counties. So I think in Logan County, PTEL has been good. It's forced us to sometimes pursue projects such as the wind farm projects, the medical cannabis facility we have, and these that are approving a containment pond for the coal mine in the southern part of the county, which was very positive.
Let me talk about wind farms and things of that nature in just a moment, but I want to get Dave's take on whether PTEL has been a good or a neutral or a bad thing in Tazewell County.
You know what? I think for the county, it's been a good thing overall. I mean, we're in a situation right now where we're going to ask for a slight increase in terms of the cents. But It's not, when we pass something like this, when the voters pass something like that, it just doesn't affect Tazewell County, it affects all of our school districts. So they may not be as excited about it as we were when we passed it.
To be clear, we need to point out that when when the referendum passes, it doesn't affect just county government. It affects every other unit of government that's totally within the county boundaries, unless it's home rule.
That's correct. That's correct. The city of Washington is home rule. A taxing district like ICC that covers multiple counties is not under the PTEL restrictions.
David, let's go back to the question of wind farms. That's been, or will be, hopefully, a boon for Logan County. Can you explain the situation with the wind farms down there?
Yes, about 10 years ago, under Bob Farmer's chairmanship, and he then served again as chairman and was excellent, we positioned ourselves trying to become the wind farm capital of the state. But we also had north-south transmission lines, and we have excellent wind currents at the desired height. So one of the things we did was we raised our tower heights to the highest in the nation. And I'm not saying we're going to go 750 feet, but we tried, just like what Wendy said a few minutes ago, we tried to get out ahead of an issue so that we would position ourselves for that. It's maybe not the most perfect, it's subsidized by the government, but it fits what we have to offer. So we pursued that. We have 2 projects approved now. There's talk about one of the projects having a phase 2, and Invenergy, a Chicago-based company, has been seriously exploring a project down the eastern corridor of Logan County, and those would be major revenue sources for us as well as jobs and so forth.
Major revenue source being how much money?
We'd be looking per project at about an extra $200,000 to $250,000. It's based on the energy produced, but it could be upwards of $250,000 of new tax revenue every year. We would also get between $750,000 to $1 million of permit fees per project.
The $200,000 to $250,000
Yes.
would be a recurring income.
Yes, and it would also benefit other areas, park districts, emergency service districts. For instance, the New Holland Middletown Fire Protection District, which has only a few hundred residents, with one of the approved projects would get an extra $71,000 a year. The school district in the for Mount Pulaski Elkhart, which has an annual budget of $4 million, would get an extra $1 million a year.
Dave, you have a portion of a wind farm in Tazewell County.
We do.
But no new projects?
No new projects on the horizon.
And new construction for that first year doesn't fall under PTEL. Is there any significant project coming up in Tazewell County that you can look for that additional revenue?
Nothing that I can recall off the top. I can tell you that the downtown portion of East Peoria has helped Tazewell County in the sales tax dollars that they help deliver to the county.
Well, in fact, let's talk about sales tax dollars. Let's talk about the state of Illinois. What kind of impact has the state of Illinois had on sales tax dollars?
Well, for our public safety sales tax, when they passed the budget, they included a 2% administrative fee. So we have a public safety sales tax that was established for when we began jail, paid the bonds, and then helps maintain the building. And so what will happen now is, effective July 1st, when this was passed, they will take 2%. So roughly $150,000 of money to administer, as they say, the sales tax for us.
Another, if we call it unfunded mandate, I suppose this is just taking money.
Right, right.
How much of a bind has state actions put Tazewell County in? And I don't mean dollar amount, I mean...
Right. Well, part of the problem is many of these actions come mid-budget year for us, so that we've not planned. A couple of years ago, they reduced the size of the juries, but then they also mandated that we pay them more, and that came in the middle of a budget year, and that was going to cost Tazewell County, I want to say, about $50,000 a year. Well, the Supreme Court said that the jury size had to be 12, not 6, but they didn't address the $50 per day that we had to pay the jurors. So it's those types of things that come without consulting the counties, and many times come mid-year, that really cause some headaches and problems for us.
And David, there's some discussion in the state, and I'll grant you it's just discussion at this point, but it could impact your jail, all county jails.
That's what we've been told, that there may be more prisoners being housed locally than would be in state DOC facilities. And I think that the conditions under which people are incarcerated are and probably should be continued to be improved. But when you have a jail that was built in the 70s, like we have in Logan County, as well run as it is, it's probably not sufficient for what will be coming in the years to come. And I'm just going to add one thing, and I say this somewhat in support of the Tazewell County initiative, that what the public expects and expected back in '96 is different than what they expect today. And I think we have a responsibility to be responsive to what the public's expectations are. So not only do we have more mandates from the state, I think we have a public that expects us to deliver more. And that in turn means you have to have the resources to meet their expectations.
Well, that would lead us to a conversation regarding the selling, that's my term, the selling of the referendum.
Right.
In March, you're going to ask for that 15-cent increase. How are you going to go about explaining, because it's a complex issue, how do you explain to the public the need for that increase after having a tax rate that stayed steady for so many years?
Right. The first thing that I'm going to do when I go out and speak, and I already have several engagements already planned, is I'm going to ask people to just have an open mind. Please just don't reject it out of hand, and listen to our story and see if what we say is credible, and look at our track record, look at our finances. We have no debt. We do have fund balances, and we do have the second lowest tax rate in the state of Illinois. So just look at the complete picture, because as a taxpayer myself, it's pretty easy to just say no right out of the chute. But I think once you see the entire story, the vote won't be as easy as it might be just on the surface.
Wendy, might you look for help in selling this?
I think, and Dave had mentioned as we were talking earlier that they had utilized some groups that are trusted. So going to your chambers, your rotaries, meeting with the people who do have an impact in in the community. I think that will be it'll be very helpful as we move forward with this.
A question you don't want. What happens if it fails?
Well, and that's a good question. And currently, we're setting up some meetings in January to talk about what if it doesn't pass. And there will be some consequences. And I will tell you that as a citizen, I hate to be blackmailed, and we won't sell it that way. But there will be some consequences. If the money's not there, there'll be cuts. There'll be cuts one way or the other, but the cuts will just be deeper.
How are you preparing, Wendy? Because you have a referendum in March, and you have to look at your budget. So are you doing a dual track budget?
Well, we just approved our budget that started on December 1. So our plan is to begin these meetings in January and spend the next 6 months so that we have a plan. Midway through, we will know exactly what we will have. And so we are making those decisions, but we are trying to get those department heads that we have at the county who have been great to work with to weigh in with us and to get in this and help us figure this out. And I think that is the approach we plan to take as we move forward. We know we have to do something.
Let me talk to David momentarily about, you've had several referenda recently in Logan County.
We have.
One was a Veterans Assistance Commission, which did not exist before. And that required a vote.
It did. Well, the levy, which was the funding instrument for it, was what was on the ballot, and that passed at least 2-1.
How did you go about, and maybe this is to help Wendy and Dave, but how did you go about letting the public, when it passes 2-1, there must have been something you did or explained that convinced the public?
Well, on the positive side, we also had the 1% sales tax for education. At the same time, I don't know how Chairman Zimmerman is, but there are a lot of things when I was board chairman that didn't go through. So they can distill my advice according to their expert interpretations. But we went to different groups. that the public would trust. I think it created a diversity. The Farm Bureau, we went to some of the American Legion, to some of the VFW posts. We went to the chamber and the business community. We went to unions. And when you get people that they trust from these different segments of society saying that, like the 1% sales tax for education will mean that we'll have better schools. And I think, when I went to school, we didn't have air conditioning. I'm glad that my kids, when they went to Lincoln Elementary, did have air-conditioned buildings. And we went on the Veterans Assistance. That's a large funding source, but people trusted the veterans. They trusted the other groups that supported that. And I think it was helpful for us. I think it also showed that we don't operate in a vacuum as the county board of Logan or Tazewell County. You have strategic partnerships with your Farm Bureau, with the business community, with other unions, special interest groups, the veterans. And I think that as these people from Tazewell go out, they'll find that there's more diverse support for this, and that's probably a reflection of the confidence they have in Tazewell being a very well administered and very fiscally responsible county.
David mentioned the Farm Bureau, and it strikes me that one thing we haven't talked about is agricultural land. Both Logan and Tazewell County have a lot of ag land, and that's based upon crop production. The taxes based upon crop production. Can you explain how that might impact your budget? Because a bad crop year, it could mean less money.
Right, and I did talk to our supervisor of assessments. In the aggregate, your aggregate tax bill, and this probably is across the county, but for farms, they're probably going to see about a 2% increase in their tax bill. And as far as the soil productivity and the crop production, it's a fairly complicated formula on how they assess the farmland or deliver that initial or that tax bill. And so, as Wendy was saying earlier, 1 year of a great crop or 1 year of a bad crop is not going to see, you're not going to see spikes and drops in their property taxes.
So it's an average on agricultural land?
It is. It is over a period, I believe, of 3 years. So they look at, so if you have 2 good years and a bad year, they weight it or kind of roll it in, and so you don't see the impact as much as if it was just on that year and you just had a bad year. But if you have 3 bad years, of course you'll see it. Anytime you have a bad year, it's going to affect you somewhat negatively.
And likewise in Logan County, you have a lot of agricultural land.
We do, and the downside to this formula is that even if production levels are high, sometimes commodity prices are lower. So, it still might hit the landowner and secondarily the production farmer, with difficulty. But again, I think what they're talking about, given their already very low tax rate, is something that can probably be absorbed by the vast majority of property owners, whether they're agricultural or residential.
We just have a minute left here to discuss the referendum in March. I want to revisit that in terms of, can you explain what will the question be in March?
Well, the state dictates the specific language, but right now our tax rate is 49 cents per 100. We're asking it to go up to 64 cents per 100. And so it'll be a yes or no question. And as I said, even if we go up to 64 cents, or as Wendy said, that'll still make us the 5th lowest in the state of Illinois. And it's something that I'm pretty proud of. And it's not anything that this current board has done, but we're standing on the shoulders of decades of boards before us that have made good decisions up to this point.
And let me ask, if you've had a steady tax rate for so long and now all of a sudden it's going from 49 to 64, why wasn't there a decision, and I know different boards, different members, but maybe 10 years ago you asked for a 5 cent and then 5 years ago another 5 cents.
Right.
Because all of a sudden people are looking, well, why 15 all of a sudden?
Right. Hindsight is 20/20, H. I mean, I wish we would have taken those incremental increases over the past 15 years, but quite frankly, we didn't need it. And so we didn't take it, and now we need it. We kind of have that perfect storm where we need the revenue.
And if it doesn't pass, you still have some reserves, so you're not in immediate trouble?
We're not in immediate trouble, but we do have some hard questions to answer because you can only handle this for so long with these reserves, probably 2 to 3 years, and then we're in a financial situation we don't want to be in.
And with that, we have run out of time, and we'll look to the results of the March referendum in Tazewell County. I want to say thank you to David Hepler, who is the Finance Committee Chair down in Logan County, and to Wendy Farrell, who is the Tazewell County Administrator, for joining in the conversation.
Thank you.
And likewise, thank you to Dave Zimmerman, who is the Tazewell County Board Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on At Issue. Next time, we're going to be talking about agriculture. We're going to have discussion about trade, the Farm Bill, nutrient management. People from Country Financial, a farmer, and the Illinois Farm Bureau will join us for that conversation on the next At Issue. Join us then.